is open 24 hours, providing counseling help for abused women. Call the YWCA shelter.
WANE TV Fort Wayne.
This is Focus 15 with Ken Owen.
Good morning and welcome to Focus 15. I'm your host, Ken Owen, and joining us this morning is Indiana's 4th District Congressman Dan Coats. We'll be talking about a variety of subjects ranging from budget matters to the foreign trade imbalance, but let's start with tax reform.
On May 28th on national television, President Reagan unveiled his tax reform plan, a plan he says would make the system more equitable. The president called the current tax code outdated and un-American.
Comparing the distance between the present system and our proposal is like comparing the distance between a Model T and the space shuttle. And I should know, I've seen both.
Reagan is calling for a simplified system of 3 tax rates. The White House says under the plan, overall taxes paid by individuals would be reduced by 7%, while corporations would see their total taxes increase by 9%. The Reagan proposal would levy a minimum tax on corporations. In addition, some business expenses would no longer be deductible. The same would hold true for all state and local taxes. The big bonus for individual taxpayers is that the plan doubles the personal exemption to $2,000.
Congressman Coats, you've long been pushing for a doubling of the personal exemption. That has to be seen as not only a victory for families, but a personal victory as well.
The most exciting part of the tax reform for me, something I've been personally involved in for about 1.5 years now, and that is bringing some tax fairness to the average family, the working men and women who are trying to raise their kids and buy their clothes and send them to school, have been discriminated against, not intentionally, but in order to carry the load for funding of government with all these other special breaks available to special people and special corporations and nothing available to the family, we're carrying a greater load than we should. And the family is such an important segment and element of society. We want to preserve it and enhance it and do everything we can to encourage it. So by doubling the personal exemption, an idea incorporated now in the President's plan, endorsed by the Democrats with their response to the President's plan, we're making great strides toward providing more take-home pay to that average family. And it's just a very heartwarming aspect of this tax code, the one that I'm most excited about, I guess because I've spent so much time and effort and energy trying to make this part of the tax reform.
But Congressman, there have been criticisms of the plan. Does the President's plan go far enough?
I think it's a great plan. I endorse probably 90% of it. There are going to be some changes. The Ways and Means Committee wants to make some changes. Maybe there should be. If there's areas where it can be more fair, where it helps out the middle class, middle income taxpayer, we ought to make those changes. But it's an idea whose time has come. As Emerson said, nothing is as dangerous, or in this case, as important as an idea whose time has come. And I really think we're going to have meaningful tax reform. It's something I've been talking about ever since I've been in Congress, and I'm excited about the prospect.
Some have complained it's not hard enough on corporations.
Well, if it's not, we ought to make it harder. I think what Americans want is for everybody to pay their fair share. Not more than their fair share, but their fair share. And I think a lot of us are incensed and outraged when, through tax breaks, intended or unintended, individuals or corporations end up making a lot of money and not paying a cent in taxes. That's not right. That puts an extra burden on all the rest of us who are just going to work on Monday morning and getting a check on Friday afternoon, having the taxes deducted, not able to take advantage of all these special exotic deductions. That's a bad system, and so I think it's time we corrected that.
Congressman, what changes would you make in the tax plan? In other words, what do you like and dislike about it?
Well, I'm very happy that the original President's plan was changed from a cap on charitable deductions to allowing full charitable deductions. We want to encourage people to give to United Way, Big Brothers, the church, whatever, because we can provide services for people in need so much better through the private sector than government can. So full retention of charitable contributions. Secondly, mortgage interest. Owning a home is the American dream. We want to keep that dream. We want to give people an incentive to do that. So maintaining full deduction for mortgage interest is critical. Third, retirement. we want people to set aside for retirement, to set aside for a rainy day, and not depend on the government for all their income once they retire. And so doubling of the IRA exemption, allowing a spousal IRA, allowing deduction for contributions to pension plans, I think is important, and we need to retain that. There are, I think, we need to go through the retained exemptions for some business interests, particularly oil and gas. Initially, we eliminated a lot of the depletion allowances and special breaks that oil and gas industry had. They were restored in the second Treasury plan, I think restored too far. We need to, I think, go in and make those fair, reduce some of those deductions, and that'll give us some funds to use for, I think, more needy purposes. So fine-tooth comb some of the exemptions that are left, retain the basic deductions that I outlined, which I think are pro-growth, pro-family, what this country stands for, and I think then we'll have a good tax plan that'll provide lower rates for the individual and fair rates in a simplified plan where everybody can understand what they're doing.
It's been said this plan would allow, instead of 3 martini lunches, 2 martini lunches. You think we should be down to 1 or perhaps no martini lunches on the government's expense?
I don't think we should allow deduction for business expenses for entertaining lunches or whatever beyond a reasonable amount that's commensurate with the business that's conducted. There's no reason why we need to allow a $50 or $100 deduction for a lunch. You don't need to have that kind of lunch in order to conduct business. I just finished lunch. I had local ice cream parlor here. I had a milkshake and a hamburger. I don't need a $50 deduction. America, the society, doesn't need it either. There's no reason why you have to go to a fancy French restaurant and drink 3 bottles of wine at lunch and say that that's necessary to conduct business. People want to do that, that's fine. That's their choice. But let's not make the taxpayer pay for it.
Congressman, let's move on to the budget. What is happening on Capitol Hill as far as a debate on a compromise over the House and Senate budget bills?
The Senate and the House have both passed budget deficit reduction plans totaling about $56 billion each. We have some differences to resolve between those two versions. It's now in a conference committee resolving those differences, and I'm very confident that long before our September 30 budget deadline for the next fiscal year, we will have enacted meaningful budget deficit reduction plan. That's critical to our future. That's critical to sustaining this economic recovery, to lowering of interest rates. And it's something that a lot of people said Congress could never do. We did face up to those special interest groups. We did bite the bullet. I think we basically made a plan that's very fair. Everybody makes their contribution. We freeze a lot of programs. Defense is not excluded. They're taking a pretty big wallop, a pretty big bite out of defense, but they deserved it. They couldn't handle the money we did give them. There were problems within the Department of Defense, and I think they're going to have to learn to live with less, just like the rest of us are. And I'm feeling very good about the fact that Congress did what it had to do, faced up to all the special interests and said the good of the country is more important than the good of any special interest. And for the future sake of investment, of growth, of jobs, of our children, of our savings, we need to lower these interest rates, and to do that we need to reduce the deficit, and we're going to do it.
Congressman, the flood of Japanese imports has a lot of people concerned. The economy is rolling along, and it really isn't hurting us right now to the degree it would if the economy was in a recession. But what can the U.S. do to get on a more even ground with Japan?
Well, that's a sleeper issue that's lurking in the background. And as important as the budget deficit is, as tax reform is, this is also an issue that I think is going to play an important part in this Congress, particularly if we have any kind of business downturn or we see American jobs threatened by foreign imports. What we have to do, in my opinion, is to really get tough with nations like Japan that have had pretty free and open access to the American consumer market here, but have restricted American access to their market over there. That's a vibrant, dynamic, growing country of more than 100 million people. That's a great market for us, but we're continually frustrated in our ability to ship American goods into their country. It's very important that we have that open access, because about 1 out of every 5 jobs in the 4th District, for instance, of Indiana is a job that is due to exports. We're making products for foreign consumption. We need to make sure those markets are open, and I think we're going to have to put a lot of pressure on Japan and say, look, talk is cheap. We want action. We want to see open access to your markets. We have equipment and goods that we make and agricultural products that we grow that can compete in your market, and if you deny us access to your markets, we're going to deny you access to ours. In other words, if you want to sell your Sony and you want to sell your Toyota over here, we want to ship our soybeans, we want to sell our telecommunications equipment, we want IBM to be over there and McDonald's and everybody else competing on an equal basis. We're not asking for special favors. We're just saying, let us get in there and compete on an even hand, just like you're competing here.
When President Reagan was elected back in 1980, one of the campaign pledges he made was he would push to repeal the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Of course, we're still driving. We still see the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit signs. What's your feeling on that? Should we boost the speed limit?
This is, I guess, where I divert a little bit from my strong states' rights advocate position. The facts are clear. We have saved thousands and thousands of lives on the highways because we've had lower speed limits. The phrase speed kills has a lot of meaning behind it. And I think we have demonstrated not only a safety factor, but a fuel consumption factor here that helps lessen the dependence on OPEC oil, and that those two together really speak pretty strongly for a reasonable speed limit. Now, I know the people in the West really reason where you've got a wide open spaces and the highway is straight and not another car in sight for several miles, really resent that 55 mile per hour speed limit. But if you've ever driven in the West, you're driving 55 miles an hour, you're going to get run over because for one reason or another, people drive faster and the authorities let them drive faster if the road's safe. But I think by and large, we ought to stay with the 55 mile per hour speed limit. That won't make a lot of people happy who hear me say that. But I think saving those lives and the fuel consumption are two very, very good reasons. Besides, it's a little more comfortable. I remember driving, you know, at 70, you used to have to push it up to 75. As you do now, 55, you kind of edge up to 60, feeling you got a little leeway. I never did feel in total control at 75. It's a dangerous situation. At 55, you have much more time to react to situation. So it's a more relaxing drive. You leave 15 minutes early. I think it's a law we ought to stay with.
Recently, the Democrat-controlled House voted to seat Democrat Frank McCloskey in Indiana's 8th Congressional District. A House recount showed McCloskey the winner, but Indiana officials claim Republican Rick McIntyre won the race.
Will Republicans continue to fight to get back the 8th District seat?
The fight is over for now in the McIntyre-McCloskey situation because on a straight party line votes, the Democrats have decided that they're going to seat their man, Frank McCloskey, and the court has upheld the right of the Congress to seat its own members. And I think ultimately the people will decide, but it's going to be the election in November of 1986. I think Mr. McIntyre is going to run again, and the people then will have a chance to decide who should represent them.
I'd imagine from your perspective, the House is setting a very dangerous precedent by seating McCloskey.
Terrible precedent, because what it says is that whichever party is in power, if there's a close election, they're going to take it away from the state, who has always had the authority to determine who represents the state in Congress. They're going to take away and make it a subject of partisan politics, and that's dangerous. Whether the Republicans control or the Democrats control, it shouldn't be decided on the basis of who has power in the House of Representatives. It should be decided on the basis of what are the state laws and who did the people elect to represent them in Congress. And so I'm very fearful that this has set a precedent that anybody who is subject to a close congressional election in the future, whatever party's in power will simply say, we're going to decide it in the back room instead of out the ballot box where it ought to be decided.
The U.S. and Soviet Union are back at the bargaining table in Geneva. They have a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. What is your gut feeling, if you will, on the prospects for the U.S. and Soviet Union coming to an agreement for peace?
Well, I think it's very tenuous at this point. I think there's the possibility, but I wouldn't want to raise expectations at this point. Gorbachev, just like Andropov and Chernenko and Khrushchev before, and all the Soviet leaders, are the product of a system. and they don't, as we've seen, they don't rise to the top without coming through a pretty brutal process, weeding out process. Now, I would hope that Gorbachev is cut of a different cloth, that he is a different kind of person, that he'll bring a new order to the Soviets. But I don't hold out a great deal of hope for that. I guess we can hope and pray that that's the case, that it'll lead to meaningful discussions between the United States and the Soviets and lead to a realistic, meaningful peace process. But I think we have to be ever vigilant. The Soviets have not demonstrated good faith in many of the treaties that they've signed before. I think our posture should be prepared, be ready for any eventuality, but always extend the open hand of peace. We're willing to meet with you and talk with you anywhere, but just in case, we need you to know we're prepared in case it doesn't work out.
Congressman Dan Coats, we thank you for joining us. Focus 15 will return in just a moment.
News 15 and the Missing Children Network, working together to locate our nation's missing children, a successful partnership. Over 40% of the children seen on the Missing Children Network reports have been found. Thousands are still missing. Won't you help us find them? Watch the Missing Children Network reports Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon and 6 p.m. on News 15. We're working harder for you.
June is Adopt a Cat Month, and Morris is looking for some good places for his friends.
It pays to be finicky.
This year, we've got more kittens to choose from than ever before, including your favorite kind.
Well, at least there's a view.
You can adopt a cat right now at your local animal shelter. He won't take up much room, except in your heart.
If they serve din-din on demand, we'll take it.
A few seconds. That's all the time it takes to sign your name to a donor card. My name is William DEVANE, and this card makes me a potential donor. Don't get me wrong, I love life, but in the event that something were to happen to me, I'd like to think that I could give someone else a second chance. And I just might, because transplant surgery saves thousands every year. My family knows how I feel because we've talked about it, and I hope you will too. Take a few minutes to talk, and then a few seconds to give someone a second chance.
Welcome back to Focus 15. Joining us now is Dr. Oliver Kaiser from the Ellen County Board of Health. And Dr. Kaiser, we have a number of issues we want to touch on this morning. First of all, just recently the Board of Health announced that first-time school children this fall will be required to be immunized. Why is that being done?
That's to assure that the immunization levels in this community would be as high as possible. At this point, our immunization level is about 95%, but in the last couple of years, the immunization level here in Allen County has dropped slightly. And the importance of this, of course, is to protect the children from the diseases, the vaccine-preventable diseases, and also to protect the community from transmission of disease from children to other people in the community. It's really in addition to a school health program. It's a community health program from the point of view of protecting the entire community.
So if you're a mother or father and you're wondering where can I take my child for an immunization, should they go to their regular doctor? Is there a place they can go where the Board of Health will take care of them?
We recommend that parents take their children to their family physicians, because the family physicians can not only give the vaccines and prevent the diseases, they also maintain a profile on the entire health of the child.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the diseases that can be spread if children aren't immunized?
Well, the vaccine-preventable diseases that we're talking about, of course, are measles, mumps, and rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough, plus polio. And those are the vaccine-preventable diseases that are included within the state immunization law.
One of the big issues over the past several years, and an issue that looks like it'll be around for quite a while, is, of course, AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. What is the situation here in Fort Wayne and Indiana? Do we have a major problem here? The caseload, what does it look like?
Indiana, fortunately, at this point, doesn't have a major problem. There are 37 confirmed cases of AIDS in Indiana. There are 6 cases, there have been, I should say, 6 cases of AIDS in Fort Wayne. Those cases have been imported from elsewhere. People who have been exposed and infected elsewhere and come back to Fort Wayne have become ill and been hospitalized. However, there is very little solace in that type of analysis, because on the basis of the way the AIDS disease is expanding in the United States, every state and every locale is at
risk.
And what exactly is the Allen County Board of Health doing to keep an eye on the situation?
We are maintaining contact, of course, with hospitals. We are a reporting center from hospitals for that and other types of communicable diseases that are reportable then to the State Board of Health. We're trying to do all we can in education to try to impress upon people that AIDS is a lifestyle disease, and the way to prevent AIDS is avoidance behavior.
We were talking before the program, pardon me, that for years, or since AIDS really hit the national scope of news a couple of years ago, it's been associated with homosexual activities, but that's not quite the case today. It's spreading to both heterosexuals and homosexuals.
That's correct. That's the basic threat of AIDS to all of the United States, and for that matter all of the world, and that is that it has been primarily, and still is, of course, maintained in the homosexual, bisexual population. However, the spread now is making its way into the heterosexual population, and there is where the high risk lies.
So that the key is lifestyle maintenance.
That's right, avoidance behavior.
Let's move on to mosquito control. Now, we had a pretty dry spring this year, and for that reason, we haven't seen too many of the critters flying about. But do you see that changing as the weather heats up, perhaps as we get some more rain?
Yes, I do see that changing from the point of view that mosquitoes are creatures of both temperature and moisture. And we are not going to get through, nor have we gotten through any summer, without a significant population of mosquitoes. That's their survival mechanism, to reproduce in large numbers, and unfortunately human beings help that by being recipients of bites of females that take blood meals to enhance reproduction.
Well, because of the lack of mosquitoes thus far, has the Board of Health been busy with the situation, or just kind of monitoring it and waiting for the situation to worsen?
No, our program is in place now. It started essentially about June 1st. The time we start varies with the populations of mosquitoes we find. We monitor mosquitoes, determine populations in various areas of the community. Then we establish our program, which is generally a four-faceted program. We monitor, like I'd mentioned, to determine populations. We intensively larvicide to kill mosquitoes in a confined area like water. They breed in water, and this is the area where we find, and everybody finds it more successful to kill them. If then they are found by viral surveillance to be transmitting the virus, and the birds are infected and the mosquitoes are capable of transmitting the virus, then we do adulticiding, which then kills the infected mosquitoes on the wing. The viral surveillance program is important because what we do in that case is to net English sparrows, that's the primary bird we test, with a sheer, what's called a Japanese mist net, bleed those birds and send the bloods to the Indiana State Board of Health to determine whether or not the birds are infected. Primarily, St. Louis encephalitis is our disease occurrence here when it occurs, and that's primarily a bird-mosquito amplification situation with a spillover of the virus into the human population.
What is the threat of encephalitis in a city like Fort Wayne? It seems as though when you think of encephalitis, you think of bayou countries or the Panama Canal.
Yeah. Mosquito-borne viral encephalitis in Fort Wayne has only been noticed serologically over a period of one time. In 1975, we had a substantial outbreak of St. Louis encephalitis in Fort Wayne, as did the rest of the United States, at least east of the Mississippi River and in the Midwest. And what we're concerned about here is that there is no announcement other than the fact that there is virus activity noticed originally in the birds and then in the mosquitoes. And then at that point, there has to be a mechanism for killing as many of the infected female mosquitoes on the wing as possible. And that's our program of adulticiding. We try to preclude large amplification of the virus by killing the mosquitoes before they can mature, and that's larviciding.
You're doing your part to control mosquitoes. A lot of people get out the sprays and the stick roll-ons and apply those mosquito repellents. Do those things, I hate to put you on the spot, but are those things recommended? Do they really work?
We recommend them very highly. They're very effective. And the important point here is that in many cases, St. Louis encephalitis is a homegrown variety of virus infection, because the mosquitoes that transmit it, the Culex variety of mosquito, does not migrate very far from where it's hatched. So we recommend that people control breeding sites on their own property and do everything they can do, again, in avoidance behavior from being bitten, by wearing protective clothing, by using the commercially available repellents, and reducing breeding sites wherever they can be found.
The key is we've been lucky so far. So
we have been lucky.
Now, we've heard a lot about the salmonella outbreak in the Chicago area. We've heard this past week about a outbreak of food poisoning because of some bad cheese in California. I'd like to touch on briefly here with the picnic season growing and the temperatures getting hotter. I'm sure the Board of Health has some warnings for people who could be stricken by food poisoning if they're not more careful.
We certainly do. Our main concern, and we maintain a division in our department that does nothing but try to prevent diseases that, like occurred, the salmonellosis in Indiana. Primarily, though, Illinois. It occurred in Indiana also, but the source was in Illinois. And that is, we inspect all food establishments. They're under licensure by our department, and some are under licensure by the State Board of Health. But this season of the year is picnic season and outdoor activities where people will prepare home-prepared foods and will use perishable products that go a long ways in supporting bacterial multiplication and toxin production that can make people ill. So there is one statement that's well publicized, and I'll publicize it again, and that is to keep food at temperatures 45 degrees or less, or 140 degrees or higher, and that will prevent the replication and amplification of the bacteria that cause food poisoning.
Here's a scenario for you, though. You're going out on a picnic and you've got the cooler and you've got potato salad in the cooler. You're out for 3 or 4 hours, you come back, the ice is melted, it's a little bit warm in there. Is there anything people can do if they're going to be out for long periods of time, perhaps even a couple of days on a camping trip, that can prevent food poisoning?
Well, of course, there are dehydrated foods in terms of camping. There are dehydrated foods that are available that are very good. In cases where people home prepare foods, perishable foods that are subject to food poisoning, the thing to do is to make certain that there is a source of cooling at all times during the period of time a person's waiting to serve that food. There is the availability of bag ice and the availability of dry ice, and those things can be used in coolers that food can be kept at proper temperatures for a long period of time, several hours at least.
Now, with the salmonella outbreak in Chicago affecting thousands of people and the outbreak in California only affecting about 20 people with the cheese, we've had 2 major food poisoning cases in just a month or so. Yes. Is this rare? Does this pose any threat to the rest of us?
Let's talk about the salmonellosis outbreak in Illinois and Indiana first. Centers for Disease Control has reported that there has never been an outbreak, an epidemic of salmonellosis